I am a video game designer, and I do games well. What I don't do so well is deal, but that is exactly what I had to do in January of 2011 when I lost my aunt to cervical cancer. The cancer came on very quick, and within a month of diagnosis, she was gone. I saw my family come together then in a way that was both awesome and heartbreaking. But it was never more heartbreaking than watching my three teenage cousins trying to deal with this loss that was immense. I so desperately wanted to help, but being equally unprepared myself, I didn't know how to. I felt incapacitated. This was a huge shame for me, but it was also a call to action. I started working on a video game. The game was Unsafe. Unsafe because that was how I felt at the time. Unable to communicate and unsure of myself and how to react. So starting this game up, I started my research. I looked at books and I talked to psychiatrists. I talked to my cousins themselves and I talked to teenagers in general to gauge their emotional state. I started out by talking to my cousins who had so recently gone through this loss. The eldest of the three was very open in his grief. He would talk about his mother unprompted and would explain to us how he felt and how we might help. The middle of the three was a little bit more closed off in his grief. He would talk about his mother, but only when prompted. And while he would discuss his emotional state, he wouldn't do so at length. The third brother was more closed off still. He didn't like discussing his mother, whether prompted or not. He closed himself off from us, and it was difficult. From this experience, I took the fact that this is not a happy experience, that grief is not a happy thing and should not be regarded as such. I wanted to create an experience which was a little bit more subtle and a little bit darker than your average video game. Next, I went to a free-form education boarding school in Denmark to talk to teenagers and gauge just how abstract I could make an experience of this kind. Now, my expectations were that I had to be very straightforward with these teenagers, that I couldn't go into metaphors or similes. What I was, what I experienced was that the reality is that these teenagers are in fact very abstract thinkers and are welcome to both metaphors, similes, and all other kinds of abstract thinking, something that opened up the game development quite a bit. I took from this that I could make an experience which talked about grief but didn't discuss grief openly, which was about grief but wasn't a one-to-one explanation thereof. Next, I talked to Rita Poulsen, a psychiatrist who deals exclusively with teenagers dealing with loss. She explained to me that there are two main stages of grief. There is the introspective part of grief, where you are most likely alone and thinking about the loss that you've experienced, thinking about the person you've lost and what they meant to you. The second part of grief is the reconstructive part. This is where you try and reconstruct the life you used to have. You talk to friends or family and you try and resemble normalcy. What happens if a person chooses one over the other is they might end up suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, not having dealt with their grief in the right way. They might actually have negative repercussions thereof. What I took from this was the experience of duality. I wanted to create an experience where not everything is seen and not everything seen is real. So I created a mechanic in which there are things in the game world that you can't see with the naked eye. They're only seen once you shine a light upon them. They are floating objects that can only be seen sometimes. Lastly, I looked into Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a psychiatrist who wrote exclusively about grief. And what she wrote about was the fact that grief is not an emotion, it is a process containing denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. These are known as the 5 stages of grief, and it's the emotional process that you go through when dealing with loss. This is not a linear process. One might jump around from emotion to emotion, but the idea of this segmented experience was something that I had seen mirrored in my cousin and something that I had experienced myself. And I wanted to mirror that into the game. This became simply a level system. I would have levels based on grief, bargaining, depression, acceptance, anger. Each of them their own separate level, but each of them representative of an emotional state. This game put together became Unsafe. Thank you for your time.